Tonight, a worldwide exclusive. Princess Diana, as you've never heard her before.
I hated myself so much. I didn't think I was good enough.
This is the story the royal family doesn't want you to hear. A story so damning, Diana had to record it secretly on tape.
My husband made me feel so inadequate in every possible way.
She hoped the tapes would change her life for the better. They wound up changing history. Now, 6 years after her death, her voice will finally be heard. Diana, intimate and unrehearsed.
I said, I can't marry him. I can't do this. This is absolutely unbelievable.
Both joyful and anguished.
I was just so desperate. I knew what was wrong with me.
With remarkably candid confessions and explosive revelations.
I was trying to cut my wrist with razor blades.
Plus, never-before-seen video that offers a rare glimpse at the lighter side of a princess.
To that question.
And exclusive interviews with Diana's closest friends, some talking for the first time. Tonight, an NBC special, Princess Diana, The Secret Tapes.
Good evening, I'm Jane Pauley. The Princess of Wales lived her life in public. She couldn't hide from the press if she tried, and she did try. But the public's appetite for details about Diana's life was insatiable. And still, the true story of her life, to a remarkable degree, was secret, until she told the secrets herself on 6 deeply personal audio tapes, the closest thing we'll ever have to her autobiography. Her own story, from an unhappy but privileged childhood, to a tragically mismatched marriage, to her hard-won independence. NBC has acquired the tapes, which until now have only been heard by a handful of people.
My own children. Oh, I'm just demented about them.
There are poignant moments, especially when Diana talks about her sons, William and Harry.
I hug my children to death. I get in bed with them at night and hug them, and I always say, who loves you most in the whole wide world? And they always say, Mommy. So important.
But there is bitterness, too, and jaw-dropping honesty. You may have heard that Diana tried to commit suicide, but tonight you'll hear her describe it herself.
Charles said I was crying wolf, and I said I just felt so desperate, and I was crying my eyes out. And he said, I'm not going to listen, you're always doing this to me. He said, I'm going riding now. So I threw myself down the stairs, bearing in mind I was carrying a child.
Why did a woman so guarded in her public life record these very personal details? To understand the tapes, you have to go back to the beginning, when for all the world knew, Diana and Charles were planning a long and happy life together.
For the royal family, as far as the journalists are concerned, you're on the outside looking in.
Andrew Morton has been writing about the British royal family since 1982. He'd met Princess Diana several times, but like every member of the family, she refused to do a formal interview.
The whole idea of sitting down and talking to Diana was just, it was a fairy tale. You're in dreamland to think about that, because there was no access. I mean, the Queen has reigned for, near 50 years, and she's never once sat down and given an interview.
When the royal family did appear, their press events were stiff, short, tightly controlled photo ops.
Could you sit more closer, Peter?
In that world, the tiniest tidbit, a new haircut, the name of a dress designer, qualified as a scoop.
May we know the name of the dog, Your Majesty?
Actually, the reporters who covered her had no idea what Diana was really going through at home.
Unbeknownst to me and to the rest of the world, Diana was just at the end of her tether. Her husband was effectively living with another man's wife, Camilla Parker Bowles, and nobody had a clue about it.
Only a few close friends knew about her torment. One of them was Dr. James Colthurst, a wealthy aristocrat who met Diana on a skiing trip when she was 17. Colthurst, speaking publicly about Diana for the first time, says she was tired of the charade and dying to talk to the press about the miserable state of her marriage.
there can be a level where people can tolerate so much. The sense was that she wanted to shout from the rooftops.
The consequences of a tell-all interview were potentially catastrophic. Buckingham Palace could dismiss her as a lunatic. The press could turn against her. Diana might gain her freedom, but as Colthurst repeatedly warned her, the cost could be unbearable.
The monarch had control over Diana's children, something she was acutely aware of. They might try to label her as psychiatrically unsound, that she would then lose her 2 children.
Colthurst urged her to tell her story through an intermediary. A book, he argued, would give Diana more control over how the story was told.
She was going to say something anyway. That was going to happen. Whether that was going to be a loose cannon and an uncontrolled explosion, or whether it was going to be something which people subsequently could understand her well and therefore be sympathetic to her. The question was then, how could it be done?
Colthurst did know one reporter he thought he could trust. Andrew Morton was working on an unauthorized biography of the princess when Colthurst arranged to meet him and offered him a chance to write the authorized kind.
James kind of said, do you want an interview? I said, of course I do.
Andrew phoned me one day and said, Mike, you're not going to believe this, and he was absolutely right.
Morton took Colthurst to meet publisher Michael O'Mara, who had helped to promote the fairy tale version of the royal family in a series of best-selling picture books. O'Mara thought Colthurst was making the whole thing up.
I took some of the books I previously published off my shelves and opened them on my desk and said, well, look at these pictures. This happy woman, smiling woman with the gorgeous kids. There she is with her husband. They're holding hands and smiling. I mean, look, these are the happiest people in the world. James said, that's the point. She's having to fake it.
The 4 of them, princess, publisher, writer, and friend, started to hatch a plan. Morton would interview a few of Diana's closest friends so he could say the most personal information in the book came from them. As for the interview with Diana,
she was being followed all the time by the paparazzi. If I was seen, then that would blow the whole cover.
It was Mike's suggestion, as I remember it, that the only way to have an interview in a manageable form was to record the interview on a tape recorder. The only person who could do that was me.
Morton would write interview questions, and Colthurst would ask them, recording Diana's answers on tape. No one would suspect him. He came to Kensington Palace to see Diana all the time. A simple enough plan, but the 4 co-conspirators would soon become anxious, even frightened. There would be secret meetings outside of London, scrambler phones, even an office break-in. And with all the precautions, not one of them predicted the explosive impact these tapes would have. One afternoon in May 1991, James Colthurst rode to Kensington Palace on a bicycle. In his basket, a small tape recorder that would rock the monarchy. The guard passed Colthurst through, as he had many times before. Diana answered the door of her apartment in jeans and a T-shirt, ready to get to work.
She howled with laughter, as she saw the little tape recorder, and then she clipped the mic on herself.
It was 2:30 in the afternoon when Colthurst pressed the record button for the first time.
Give me a shout if there's something you don't want to touch on.
No, it's okay.
Before long, the words were pouring out of her. Now that she was finally free to tell her story, Colthurst said she barely paused to take a breath.
She started at the beginning of her childhood and kept going, and it was obviously something she had been wanting to talk about for a long time.
The first tape is so important because it's almost like listening to a prisoner who's been inside this institution, inside this cell for 10 years, just speaking into a microphone and almost smuggling the tape out and tell the world.
For the first time, you'll be able to hear it all for yourself when we come back. The stakes were high in May of '91 as a little tape recorder began to roll in Diana's living room. Her friend James Colthurst sat across from her in what would be the first of 6 recording sessions. This is a photograph he took of one of them. With a list of questions in hand, Colthurst started with her childhood.
Any things that stand out particularly in your childhood?
No. I mean, it was a very unhappy childhood. Parents were busy sorting themselves out.
Lady Diana Frances Spencer was born in 1961 into one of the oldest aristocratic families in Britain. Althorpe, the family estate, was in turmoil. When Diana was 6, her mother ran off with another man. The divorce was vicious.
I remember seeing my father slap my mother across the face, and I was hiding behind the door, and she was crying. And I remember Mummy cried an awful lot.
Diana distracted herself at boarding school, mostly with athletics. She admits she was no scholar, though there were a few subjects she liked.
History fascinated me, choosing Stuarts, did all that, adored that. But I never anticipated I'd end up in the books.
Were you popular as a pupil?
Yes.
No way gone on the right?
Adored them.
You didn't shout out answers and things like that?
No. Probably because I didn't think I knew them.
As for romance, well, she was more interested in romance novels. She was saving herself for the man she would marry.
All my friends had boyfriends, but not me, because I knew somehow I had to keep myself very tidy for whatever was coming my way.
In November of 1977, when Diana was 16, a royal visitor arrived at Althorpe, and the house was abuzz. Her sister Sarah had brought a young man home, none other than Prince Charles. Royal biographer Penny Junor.
In his late 20s, Prince Charles was a great catch. He was heir to the throne, he would be king, and he was a glamorous figure. He was regarded as an action man. He was always seen in one uniform or another, doing daring and dangerous things.
But Sarah's little sister wasn't all that impressed.
First impact was, God, what a sad man. He came with his Labrador, and my sister was all over him like a bad rash. I thought, God, he must really hate that. And I kept out of the way. I remember being fat, podgy, non-makeup, unsmart lady, but I made a lot of noise, and he liked that.
Neither of the Spencer girls would hold the prince's interest for long. Charles was something of a playboy then, traveling the world, not exactly ready to settle down. Diana, meanwhile, moved to London, to an expensive Kensington apartment she shared with a few girlfriends. She signed on to work as a kindergarten teacher. It was one of the happiest times in her life.
It was nice being fat with girls, and I loved that. It was great, laughed my head off there.
But life was about to get complicated. Just after she turned 18, Diana met Prince Charles again at a friend's house. This time, the prince, now 30, and under great pressure to find a proper wife, took a more active interest in her.
Her breeding was perfect, her status was perfect. He went out with all sorts of very glamorous and sophisticated women, and here was a woman, a girl, who was very fresh and naive and sweet and funny, and she flattered, and sweet and funny, and she flattered him.
They began dating, and after 2 months, Charles invited Diana to join him for Scotland's Braemar Games. It would be her first royal event. She would stay at Balmoral Castle, an official residence of the Queen.
Yeah, that break was terrifying. Well, I mean, I never stayed in Balmoral before, but wanted to get it right.
That visit to Balmoral was a milestone for another reason. It's where the paparazzi first picked up the scent. Her life would never again be her own. The press began to follow her everywhere, even spying on her through her apartment windows.
People did not understand. They had binoculars on me the whole time. They hired the opposite flat, looked into my bedroom. I cried like a baby in the four walls. I just couldn't cope with it.
But the reporters refused to back off.
Any announcement of your marriage in the near future, can you tell me?
They knew Diana was the one. She knew it too.
Any possibility? I'm not going to say anything, babe. Right, Prince Charles did give us a hint himself. He said we wouldn't have to wait too long.
On Friday, February 6th, 1981, after 7 months of courtship, Prince Charles invited Diana to Windsor Castle. He told her he had something to ask.
So he said, will you marry me? And I laughed. I remember thinking, you know, this is a joke. So I said, yeah, okay, and laughed. and he was deadly serious. He said, you do realise this one day you'll be queen? And a voice said to me inside, you won't be queen, but you'll have a tough role. So I thought to myself, okay, so I said yes.
The night before the official announcement, Diana said goodbye to her flatmates.
Champagne flew pretty quick.
And moved in with the royal family to start preparing for the wedding. A door closed on her old life forever.
I left my flat for the last time, and suddenly I had a policeman. And my policeman the night before the engagement had said to me, I just want you to know that this is your last night of freedom ever in the rest of your life, so make the most of it. And it was like a sword went in my heart.
But she was all smiles the next day, February 24th, 1981, as the couple announced their engagement from Buckingham Palace.
Can you find the words to sum up how you feel today, both of you?
And proclaimed their love for each other.
That's a word, isn't it? Really?
Sort of.
Just delighted and unhappy. And I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on. And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
Whatever did he mean by that?
Prince Charles has always been too honest for his own good. He does say the most unfortunate things at times.
No one was more confused than Diana. She just returned from a 3-week trip to Australia, where she hadn't spoken to her new fiancé even once.
Must have been an agonizing 3 weeks. Did you speak at all? I mean, the phone lines must have been pretty busy between here and Australia.
Yes, we tried, but it was quite difficult because I think there was a certain amount of press interest there, although they never actually found you, did they?
No. It was a complete disaster because I pined for him, but he never rang me up.
I said, can I speak? And they said, no, we're not taking any calls. So I said, well, it's Prince of Wales speaking. How do I know it's the Prince of Wales came back to reply?
I come back from Australia, someone knocked on my door with a bunch of flowers, and I knew that they hadn't come from Charles because there was no note. It was just somebody being very tactful in the office.
What's more, as the world became obsessed with the new royal couple, Diana suspected Charles was obsessed with another woman. Camilla Parker Bowles, a former lover of the prince, was married to one of his close friends, but Diana still noticed sparks between them.
I once heard him on the telephone in his bra, on his hand, and saying, whatever happens, I'll always love you. And I told him I'd listened at the door. We had a filthy row.
When reporters saw Diana cry as Charles left for an official trip, they thought she was missing him already. But the secret tapes reveal her heart was aching about something else.
That was nothing to do with him going. The most awful thing had happened before he went. I was in his study talking to him about his trip. The telephone rang, it was Camilla. So I thought, should I be nice or should I just sit here? So I thought I'd be nice, so I left him to it and just broke my heart for him.
Diana's anxiety began to show in a more troubling way. In 5 months, she lost 5.5 inches from her waist, and not just to look good in her wedding dress.
Bulimia started the week after we got engaged. My husband put his hand on my waistline and said, oh, a bit chubby here, aren't we? And that triggered off something in me. And I remember the first time I made myself sick, I was so thrilled, because I thought, right, this is the release, tension.
The disease would plague her for years. She had an episode of bulimia the night before her wedding. After she found a bracelet Charles was giving Camilla.
There is bunting going up all over London, and there are pictures of the royal couple in just about every shop window in town.
I knew the Camilla thing, so I was desperate.
Some people are already staking out seats along...
I ate everything I could possibly find, and I was sick as a parrot that night, and it was such an indication of what was going on.
Any woman in Diana's position might have called the whole thing off. But there were more than 2 people in this relationship. There were millions. She saw no way out. Her sisters tried to raise her spirits.
I said, I can't marry him. I can't do this. This is absolutely unbelievable. And they were wonderful. They said, well, bad luck, Dutch. Your face is on the tea towel, so you're too late to chicken out.
His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, heir to the throne of England.
And here comes the bride. On the morning of July 29th, 1981, with trumpets blaring and a worldwide audience of more than 700 million savoring every detail, Diana emerged from her glass carriage, feeling like she was going to an execution.
I was very, very deathly calm, deathly calm. I felt as I was a lamb to the slaughter, and I knew it, but I couldn't do anything about it.
It was all pomp and spectacle.
I thought the whole thing was hysterical, getting married, in the sense that it was just like, it was so grown up. And here was Diana, a kindergarten teacher, and the whole thing was ridiculous.
There were 2,500 guests in the cathedral that morning. Diana was keenly aware of one.
As I walked up the aisle, I was looking for her. Spotted Camilla, pale grey, pillbox hat, saw it all to this day, you know, vivid memory. And I thought, well, there we are, that's it, let's hope that's all over with.
Desperate for a happy ending, Diana decided to focus on the positive. She was very much in love with Charles. Maybe now, she thought, he'd be in love with her, too.
I couldn't take my eyes off him. I just absolutely thought I was the luckiest girl in the world, and, you know, he was going to look after me. Well, was I wrong on that assumption?
After their wedding, the royal couple set out for Buckingham Palace. 1 million people, by some estimates, turned out to show their excitement for Diana. The new princess was awestruck.
Got out on the balcony, overwhelming what we saw. So humble, making all these thousands and thousands of people happy. It was just wonderful.
Former palace spokesman Dickie Arbiter remembered the single moment the crowd had been waiting for.
It was almost a chant from the crowd, kiss her, kiss her. And they did kiss on the balcony. Never been done before, but they did. And there was a tremendous roar from the crowd.
But even in those first hours, those who knew Diana best were already worried about her future.
It was an optimistic time, but I can also remember a sense of just wondering, how she'd manage in the system, and I think that was a shared feeling by many of us.
Their wedding night was to be their first intimate night together. Diana said only that it was strange, very strange. They spent part of their honeymoon on the royal yacht, Britannia, but romance hardly filled the air. For their private diversion, Charles brought the works of a South African philosopher.
I just had tremendous hope in me, which was slashed by day 2. My husband took 8 Lawrence Vanderpost novels along on our honeymoon. Well, no, to read. So every lunchtime or dinner time, when we were allowed to be on our own, we were supposed to read them, but we were never on our own. And I remember crying my heart out on my honeymoon. I was so tired. For all the wrong reasons. Totally.
Her husband's choice of reading material was the least of her worries.
We were opening our diaries to discuss various things. Out comes 2 pictures of Camilla. And on our honeymoon we have a white tie-in for President Sadat. Cufflinks arrive on his wrist. 2 C's entwined like the Chanel C.
Oh, right.
Got it in one, knew exactly. So I said, Camilla gave you those, didn't he? He said, yes. So what's wrong? They're a present from a friend. And boy, did we have a row. Jealousy. Total jealousy.
Even on her honeymoon, the new princess could not escape Camilla's shadow.
My dreams were appalling at night. I dreamt of Camilla the whole time, and the bulimia was appalling, absolutely appalling. It was rife. It was 4 times a day on the yacht. Anything I could find, I would gobble up and be sick 2 minutes later. Very tired. 1 minute one would be happy, the next minute one would be blubbering one's eyes out.
How are you enjoying married life?
Highly recommend.
Diana kept her troubles hidden from the public. Her admirers clung to the image of the kindergarten teacher plucked from obscurity by a handsome prince, who took her off to a castle to live happily ever after. But Diana struggled to find her footing.
So that first week was such a traumatic week for me. I learned to be royal in 1 week. I was thrown into the deep end. Nobody ever helped me at all. They'd be there to criticise, but never be there to say well done.
Diana fell back on what she knew best, to be herself. She had the common touch that could bridge the gap between the palace and the people. The public responded to her. It would be a long time before Diana understood why.
People say to me, thank you for bringing happiness into my life. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making the effort. Thank you for being you. All those things I never used to believe.
Engaging the public is one thing. Coping with the media, quite another. They demanded more and more. Ken Lennox made a career out of photographing Diana.
Everything she did, every time she breathed in or out, they took a photograph.
The whole world were focusing on me every day. I was in the front of the papers, and I thought this was just so appalling. I hadn't actually done anything specific like climb Everest or done something wonderful like that.
In November of 1981, the palace announced that the princess was pregnant. Diana's struggle with her health proved doubly difficult.
Sick the whole time, bulimia and morning sickness. People tried to put me on pills to stop me being sick. I refused to take the responsibility that if the child appeared handicapped, I wasn't going to take responsibility.
To make matters worse, the news that she was expecting only drove the press corps into a greater frenzy. Photographers were determined to get a picture of the pregnant Diana. Nothing seemed off limits. Lennox and his tabloid competitors followed Diana and Charles on their vacation to a very private island in the Bahamas. Using a very long lens, Lennox snapped pictures of a pregnant princess in a bikini. She was distraught.
I was horrified, because I'd never walked around looking like that in a bikini.
The Queen called it the blackest day in the history of British journalism.
Overstepped the line, yeah. Oh, totally overstepped the line, by the standards of that time.
Long after the episode, Lennox asked the princess whether she was prepared to spend the rest of her life coping with the press. Her answer was telling in its naivete.
She said, oh, Mr. Lennox, Prince Andrew will get married and I'll be forgotten about. And there'll be a new woman on the scene. And I said, I don't think that's going to be the case.
In truth, Diana would be hounded by the press for the rest of her life.
I had a very bad time with the press because they literally haunted me and hunted me.
Haunted and hunted, Diana struggled to cope with feelings the press would know nothing about, but which would shape the rest of her life and their coverage of it. When we return, Princess Diana reveals her secret torment. The life of a princess was turning out to be anything but a fairy tale, though few people knew how far from enchanted it was, until Diana made these tapes years later. Tapes heard tonight for the first time ever in public, revealing how deeply unhappy she had been.
1 minute I was nobody, and the next minute I was Princess of Wales, mother, media toy, member of his family, you name it. And it was just too much for one person at that time.
The outgoing, fun-loving girl that caught Charles' eye and captivated the nation tried her best to keep up appearances, flashing that million-dollar red carpet smile. But behind closed doors, Diana said she was retreating into her shell.
I didn't want to do anything on my own. I was too frightened. I mean, the thought of reading it on my own sent tremors. So I stuck with whatever Charles did, but the pace was phenomenal. It didn't get easier. I just got used to what people required from the Princess of Wales. What Diana thought wasn't going to come into it yet, so I hadn't got enough background.
She felt desperately insecure.
I hated myself so much. I didn't think I was good enough. I thought I wasn't good enough for Charles. Oh, doubts as long as one can live. I always used to think people would just look at me for my clothes, and I was desperate for the other side to come up or to be dealt with. I didn't know how to do it.
Later on those secret tapes, Diana would rail against Charles' lack of support.
My husband made me feel so inadequate in every possible way, but each time I came up for air, he pushed me down again.
I'll tell you this, if Prince Charles had said to her from day one, well done, on a regular basis, she would never have left the royal family.
I'm really delighted that my wife has been able to come as well.
Far from being distant and uncaring, his supporters say the prince was deeply concerned about his wife.
He did all sorts of things to try and make her happy, and it made no difference whatsoever. And Diana was so needy that what she actually required was 100% of somebody's attention.
The bulimia, first apparent during her engagement, by now was out of control.
I wasn't well at all. I told everybody I was tired the whole day, but there was the bulimia that was totally taking grip of me. Suddenly in the middle of dinner, I got sick and come back again. And they said, why didn't you go off to bed? And I thought it's my duty to sit at the table. Duty was all over the shop. I didn't know which way to turn at all.
Soon, says James Colthurst, her eating disorder was a well-known fact in the royal household.
The bulimia was evident, I think, to anybody who'd known her before and then subsequently saw her, and she became thinner and thinner.
But for the millions fascinated by her every move, Diana was still the glamorous princess. It was an irony not lost on Diana herself.
The public side was very different, obviously, from the private side. The public side, they wanted a fairy princess and could come and touch them and everything would turn into gold, and all their worries would be forgotten. Little did they realise that the individual was crucifying herself inside because she didn't think she was good enough.
Eventually, the bulimia began to take a toll in public. On this 1986 trip to Canada, Diana fainted while touring an exhibition with her husband. I
never fainted before in my life, and we'd been walking around for 4 hours. We hadn't had any food, and presumably I hadn't eaten for days beforehand. When I say that, I mean the food staying down. And I remember walking around feeling really ghastly, and I didn't dare tell him when I felt ghastly. I put my arm on my husband's shoulder and I said, darling, I think I'm about to disappear, and slid down the side of him.
The incident was quickly papered over as fatigue.
Officials in Vancouver are blaming heat and fatigue for the fainting spell Princess Diana suffered.
But the reaction behind the scenes was acid, Diana recalled.
My husband told me off. He said I could have passed out quietly somewhere else behind a door. It was all very embarrassing. And inside me, I knew there was something wrong with me, but it was too immature to voice it.
My wife is feeling much better now than she was earlier this afternoon.
New Year's 1982. Just 5 months into their marriage, pregnant Diana was feeling wretched. Their relationship continued to unravel. She felt Charles was incapable of understanding her turmoil. She threatened to take her own life.
Charles said I was crying wolf, and I said I just felt so desperate, and I was crying my eyes out. And he said, I'm not going to listen, you're always doing this to me. He said, I'm going riding now. So I threw myself down the stairs, bearing in mind I was carrying a child. Queen comes out, absolutely horrified, shaking. She's so frightened. I knew I wasn't going to lose the baby, quite bruised around the stomach. And Charles went out riding, and when he came back, it was just dismissal, total dismissal.
It was one of several half-hearted suicide attempts she would make over the next decade. She revealed on the tapes that she had tried to cut her wrists and had thrown herself into a glass cabinet at Kensington Palace. Biographer Andrew Morton was stunned when he heard the revelations.
I found them literally unbelievable, because here she was, being the most photographed woman in the world, nursing these scars to her body that she'd obviously made in the kind of rage that she felt. And I think this is something that also comes over, this fury that she has, that she's been conned, she's been lured into this palace, the doors are being bolted behind her, and she's got no way out.
At another point in the mid-80s, Diana returned to London early from the royal family's annual stay in Scotland.
The media said I'd come down because I was bored of all the rain up in Scotland and I wanted to go shopping, which was absolute bull. I was very ill. We were trying to hide that from everybody. I had to come down for treatment because I was so depressed, and I was trying to cut my wrist with razor blades.
And she recalled another incident.
After 5 years of being married, my sister Jane came up to see me, and I had a V-neck on and shorts. She said, Dutch, what's that marking on your chest? And I said, oh, it's nothing. She said, what is it? And the night before, I wanted to talk to Charles about something. He wouldn't listen to me, said I was crying wolf. So I picked up his penknife off his dressing table and scratched myself heavily down my chest and my both thighs. There was a lot of blood, and it hadn't made any reaction whatsoever.
Suicide attempts are desperate calls for help. It didn't much matter, Diana said. No one was listening.
I was just so desperate. I knew what was wrong with me, but nobody else around me understood me. I needed rest and to be looked after inside my house. and for people to understand the torment and the anguish going on in my head.
But it was basically
Desperate cry for help, and I'm not spoilt. I just need to be allowed to adapt to my new position.
Diana would eventually adapt, but not before things got much, much worse. When we return, Diana recounts her darkest days. From outside the palace gates, spring 1982 appeared idyllic as the royal couple awaited their first child. But by now, little in Diana's life was as it appeared. The media interest in the impending birth was intense, so much so that Diana couldn't handle the pressure and wanted labor to be induced. But she recalled, it was difficult to schedule a birth date around the father-to-be's polo matches.
When we had William, we had to find a date in the dark that suited him and his polo. Because William had to be induced because I couldn't handle the pressure any longer. It was becoming unbearable. It was as if everybody was monitoring every day for me. Anyway, the boy arrived, great excitement, thrills, everyone was absolutely on high as a kite. We found a day that Charles could get off his polo pony for me to give birth. That was very nice. I felt very grateful about that.
As Britain celebrated its new heir,
He's in marvellous form.
Diana retreated into depression.
Came home, and then postnatal depressions hit me hard. And it wasn't so much the baby that had produced it, it was the baby that triggered off all else that was going on in my mind. Boy, was I troubled.
And it turns out that Britain's royal family, which already has a little prince, is due for a royal addition in late September.
On February 14th, 1984, Valentine's Day, Diana's second pregnancy was announced. It came as something of a surprise for Diana because by then, she said, Charles was back in the arms of Camilla.
By then I knew he'd gone back to his lady, but somehow we managed to have Harry.
Nonetheless, Diana recalled that pregnancy as the happiest time of her married life.
We were very, very close to each other 6 weeks before Harry was born, closest we've ever been and never will have been.
Their closeness was short-lived, she said, because Charles had been hoping for a girl.
And then suddenly, as Harry was born, it just went bang, our marriage, the whole thing went down the drain. And Charles, all he wanted was a girl.
What's more, Diana said Charles was horrified at Prince Harry's red hair, a distinctive Spencer family trait.
First comment was, oh God, it's a boy. Second comment, oh, and he's even got red hair. So something inside me closed off.
But the couple kept up appearances. As in this 1985 British TV documentary called The Prince and Princess of Wales Talking Personally, in which Diana continued to play the role of the ideal royal consort.
I feel my role is supporting my husband.
She even had a cheery explanation for her weight loss.
Maybe I'm so scrawny, it's because I take so much exercise. Don't know.
But the truth was the talk of the palace. Diana said the Queen herself spread the stories Charles told about her.
He definitely told her about my bulimia, and she told everybody that was the reason why our marriage had cracked up, because Diana's eating. Must be so difficult for Charles.
Despite their joint public appearances in the late 80s, Charles and Diana lived separate lives. Diana took solo trips abroad and related to people in a way no royal had ever done before, bringing comfort to lepers and AIDS patients.
And this particular man was so ill, he started crying when I sat on his bed and held my hand, so I thought, right, Diana, do it. Go on, just do it. So I gave him an enormous hug, and it was just so touching as he clung to me and he cried, and it was wonderful. It made him laugh.
It was a time of cruel contradiction for Diana. On the outside, adoring crowds and exciting work, while on the inside, she was isolated, depressed, and more desperate than ever.
I've got what my mother's got. However bloody you're feeling, you can put on the most amazing show of happiness.
What had happened during the 1980s was a parallel universe. that the world had lived in the fairy tale, Diana had lived in the nightmare, and she felt utterly powerless inside this system.
Powerless and bitterly jealous of Camilla, especially after Charles apparently stopped sleeping with his wife altogether after their 1987 royal trip to Portugal.
Shop closed up very quickly after Portugal, and that was it. And whether that meant that Camilla would come back in a big vengeance, I have no idea. I have no proof.
She talked about Camilla a great deal in one or two of the lighter discussions about Camilla, as she would say herself. You know, what she found difficult to understand is how on earth she was losing out to a girl who had, you know, bad teeth and smoking and had dandruff.
Convinced she'd been cast aside by her husband for his old flame, in the mid-1980s, Diana herself turned to others for affection. In July 1986, Diana met James Hewitt at a party. She arranged for Hewitt to give her riding lessons, and more.
Hewitt, to give him his due, helps to give her a sense of self-esteem, and it's the first proper relationship she has with a man roughly her own age.
Hewitt would not be her only lover. And while Diana railed against her husband's paramour in these tapes, she never mentioned her own extramarital affairs at all. Ken Wharf, who was Diana's bodyguard at the time, says the princess was open with him about her love life, but still clearly wanted Charles back.
I don't think she used it as a closing on her marriage. I think it was a statement. I think it was a statement saying, well, look, you know, if you can do this, so can I. And I think it was a protest.
While the palace seemed prepared to continue the charade of a happy royal household, Diana's friends said she refused to spend the rest of her life living a lie.
A large number of people around Diana saw her going fairly steeply downhill. They all knew what was going on. It was hardly going to remain a secret for long.
In fact, a climax was fast approaching. Diana was about to reveal her secret anguish to the world.
And I cried like I've never cried before. It was anger. It was 7 years of pent-up anger coming out.
When we return, Diana's innermost thoughts are revealed, plus personal videotapes that offer a rare and candid glimpse at Diana inside her Kensington Palace home.
If you come in here, you sit down and be quiet.
You'll be very quiet.
Very quiet.
A suicidal princess.
I threw myself down the stairs.
It was the anguish the world never heard. 6 secret tapes. Diana's own words revealed for the first time.
My husband made me feel so inadequate in every possible way.
Now, more explosive confessions and stunning revelations.
It was 7 years of pent-up anger coming out.
Including Diana's dramatic face-to-face confrontation with her husband's mistress.
I said to Camilla, don't treat me like an idiot.
And in another worldwide exclusive, never-before-seen video of Diana inside her palace home.
Sorry.
Rare glimpses of candor and laughter. And haunting predictions about her destiny.
I always knew I'd never be in the next queen.
An NBC special. Princess Diana, The Secret Tapes.
Was the handsome prince in love with his princess? We thought so, or wanted to believe it. Buckingham Palace wanted us to believe the royal marriage was a happy one. It was not. Tonight, more revelations about her health, how she felt like a captive in the royal household, how she confronted the other woman in her husband's life, and how she plotted and schemed to get her story told.
Here is the stuff of which fairy tales are made. The prince and princess on their wedding day. Fairy tales usually end with the simple phrase, they lived happily ever after.
The new princess had great hope that wish would come true. She was awestruck as she stepped out on the balcony that day as the newest member of the royal family.
Overwhelming what we saw. So humble, making all these thousands and thousands of people happy. It was just wonderful.
6 years before her death, Diana spoke about that moment and much more.
recording her most intimate thoughts on 6 audio tapes which have been acquired by NBC and are being heard for the first time. They reveal a woman caught between her dreams and her despair.
The public side was very different, obviously, from the private side. The public side, they wanted a fairy princess who could come and touch them and everything would turn into gold and all their worries would be forgotten. Little did they realise that the individual was crucifying herself inside because she didn't think she was good enough.
On the tapes, Diana talked frankly about so many things. The joy she had in raising her 2 sons, William and Harry.
I hug my children to death. I get in bed with them at night and hug them, and I always say, who loves you most in the whole wide world? And they always say, Mommy. It's so important.
But also her struggle to emerge from the shadow of Camilla Parker Bowles, Prince Charles' lover.
I once heard him on the telephone in his bra, on his hand and saying, whatever happens, I'll always love you.
The tapes were recorded with the help of a close friend and revealed Diana's most intimate feelings. She was blunt as she spoke of resorting to extreme measures, even attempting suicide, as her marriage fell apart.
I was so depressed and I was trying to cut my wrist with razor blades.
The broadcast of Diana's recording stirred reactions around the world.
Prinzessin Diana.
Princess Diana.
The obsession with Diana's life has barely begun to fade.
Those extraordinary tapes that broadcast on American television station NBC.
But if Prince Charles has thoughts about the tapes, he's keeping them to himself. Diana was forthright on the recordings about her bulimia, the disease which had come to dominate her life.
The bulimia was appalling, absolutely appalling. Anything I could find, I would gobble up and be sick 2 minutes later.
Diana said her husband accused her of crying wolf about the disease, which added to her distress.
My husband made me feel so inadequate in every possible way that each time I came up for air, he pushed me down again. You know, even if I ate a lot at dinner, Charles would still say, oh, is that going to reappear later? What a waste.
By 1988, the disease had gotten so out of hand, an old friend confronted the princess and gave her an ultimatum.
She said, well, you must tell your doctor. I said, I can't. She said, well, you must. I'm going to give you 1 hour to ring up your doctor, and if you don't do that, I'm going to tell the world.
Diana finally acknowledged that she needed help.
I suddenly woke up and realized that I was on the way down fast.
Diana went to a specialist in eating disorders, the same doctor who had treated her sister Sarah for anorexia. Right away, he suspected Diana had tried to commit suicide.
He said to me, how many times have you tried to get rid of yourself? And I thought, wow. So I said about 4 or 5 times. He said, how? And I said, all various instruments I tried and threats and all the rest of it, glass, a lot. And he said, I can get you better no time at all. The problem lies with your husband. And he said, in 6 months' time, you'll be a totally different person.
As Diana began to gain control over the bulimia, her strength returned, and so did her courage. She planned a confrontation with the other woman in her husband's life.
The voice inside me said, just go for the hell of it. So I sat myself up something awful. This was my big step.
It was the winter of 1989. Charles and Diana were invited to a birthday party for Camilla's sister. Unexpectedly, Diana agreed to attend. Bodyguard Ken Wharf drove the couple to the party.
It was clear that Prince of Wales was unhappy that he was being accompanied by his wife, and I'm sure that Diana probably had a hidden agenda here.
After dinner, Diana noticed Charles had slipped away. She went downstairs and found Charles and Camilla talking to another guest.
I said to the 2 men, okay boys, I'll just have a quick word with Camilla and I'll be up in a minute. And they shot upstairs like chickens with no heads, and I could feel upstairs all hell breaking loose. What's she going to do?
Diana decided this was the moment to make it clear to Camilla that the royal marriage wasn't big enough for both women.
I was terrified of that, and I said, I know what's going on between you and Charles, and I just want you to know that. And she said to me, very interesting, she said to me, you've got everything you've ever wanted. You've got all the men in the world fall in love with you, and you've got 2 beautiful children. What more would you want? So I said, I want my husband. And I said to Camilla, I'm sorry I'm in the way, and it must be hell for both of you. But I didn't know what's going on. Don't trip me up on the internet.
Tension was high as Wharf drove the royal couple home that night.
I remember in the car that there was a debate between the 2 of them. Some of it seemed to be fairly hostile.
And in the car on the way back, my husband was over me like a bad rash. And I cried like I've never cried before. And it was anger. It was 7 years of pent-up anger coming out.
Diana called it one of the bravest moments of her entire 10 years of marriage.
And the next morning I woke up and I felt different. Shift, tremendous shift. I'd done something, said what I felt. But there's still the old jealousy and the anger swirling around, but it wasn't so deathly as it's been before. And that was it, really. It was a big step for me.
There was a different princess in the sense that she'd almost sort of triumphed over something that hitherto had been a huge problem for many, many years. And there was no doubt in my mind that this really signified the ending of a marriage.
As the marriage spiraled downward, the palace tried to convince the public that the couple was still devoted, but the effort failed. A case in point, a trip to the Taj Mahal, a symbol of enduring love. Charles had visited when he was single and vowed then to return with the woman he loved. But instead of going with his wife when the opportunity arose, he went off to a business meeting instead, leaving the princess to pose alone. For photographer Ken Lennox, the symbolism was inescapable.
Here's Diana at one of the most romantic places in the world, sitting there on. And it was a sad photograph, and we saw more and more of these photographs.
It was just before that trip to India that Diana had begun making her secret tapes. She could no longer maintain the charade and was now determined to tell the public the truth about her private anguish. It would be a risky move.
And later, another set of secret tapes.
I can't do this. It's ghastly. I've got no adrenaline. I'm dead. I can't get anything out.
Diana captured on video as the world has never seen her.
In 1991, for the first time, Diana began to take control of her life. She discovered new strength and self-confidence.
I'm much happier now. I mean, I'm not blissful, but I'm much more content than I've ever been, because I've really gone down deep and scraped the bottom a couple of times and come up again.
But Diana told her close friends she felt more trapped by her marriage than ever, and more alienated from the royal family.
She was becoming angrier and angrier at what was going on within the situation.
I think I'm going to cut a very different path from everyone else. I'm going to break away from this setup.
That's when Diana decided to make her boldest move yet and reveal her secret misery to the world.
I think she was trying to make her case first before anybody else did it for her.
Telling the kind of explosive story Diana had in mind would break every rule of royal conduct. She would have to remain anonymous, fearing the consequences. The royal family might pronounce her mentally unsound, or worse.
The monarch had control over Diana's children, something she was acutely aware of. She was extremely concerned that she could then lose the children.
So if Diana was going to risk telling her story, it would have to be anonymously. In a book, she could reveal her secrets, but deny that they came from her. James Colthurst proposed his friend, Andrew Morton, an author and freelance royal reporter, whose pieces were largely sympathetic to Diana.
James said, "Do you want an interview?" I said, "Of course I do."
Hardly believing what was happening, Morton took Colthurst to his publisher, Michael O'Mara.
He must have been extremely suspicious of me.
I was convinced instantly that the guy had to be some kind of con man.
Colthurst was able to convince the author and publisher he was for real. But they had to protect Diana, who was watched day and night by photographers and palace staff. So the three hatched a plan.
Cheers.
Morton would write questions for Diana and give them to Colthurst, already a regular visitor to Diana's palace apartment. No guard would ever suspect what was nestled in the basket of his bicycle.
James would go into Kensington Palace with his tape recorder and the questions.
Straightforward questions about her childhood, her teenage years, the honeymoon, the romance.
She took the sheets of questions, clipped the mic on and settled down and answered away.
It's all right.
Yeah, it's fine. It's excellent. Perfect. Yeah, it's great.
Very relaxed, a lot of laughter.
If Diana's mood was light-hearted, almost innocent, then her accomplices also had no clue about the gravity of their undertaking. Until they heard Diana's voice on tape.
My husband made me feel so inadequate in every possible way. I threw myself down the stairs. I was just so desperate.
My heart nearly stopped beating on the spot.
Whoa, it was just amazing stuff. It was just mind-blowing.
That fall, Colthurst pedaled his bike in and out of Kensington Palace, taking in blank audio tapes.
I felt I was a lamb to the slaughter.
And bringing out stunning new revelations to a wide-eyed author and publisher.
I couldn't believe how cold and how I thought one thing, but actually another thing was going on. The lies, the deceit.
She was actually dishing the dirt on the core of the royal family. This was ultimately an extremely anti-Windsor, anti-royal family book.
In fact, Diana's revelations were so damning, O'Mara feared what might happen if the book-writing scheme was uncovered. With the main source of the scandal denying any participation, the author might end up in court.
I remember going to the lawyers, and, the lawyer was a top-level lawyer, and he said, who's the court going to believe, Mr. Morton, you or the Queen? So we knew that it had to be right.
But it had to be right for Diana. So Colthurst delivered chapters, the princess scrutinizing every word and editing the manuscript with her distinctive handwriting. Like this line, which she corrected to tell of her early love for Charles.
I think it was a shock to her when she saw it written down on paper. It got all kind of serious then, yeah?
Taking extra precautions, the accomplices used code names, pay phones, even scrambler phones, and met in the back rooms of out-of-the-way restaurants.
I had my office swept for bugs. Diana had her offices swept for bugs.
Were they simply paranoid? It didn't appear so when Morton's office was broken into and ransacked. So for nearly 6 months, with every new chapter, the conspirators became more frightened.
And it was just like a movie. You're looking around, you're thinking you might be followed, and you get on the subway, and I'm thinking, is somebody watching me?
I was always worried if I fell off the bicycle or something and somebody then listened to the tape and realised what they had in their hand. It was a little bit like having a ticking bomb.
The bomb nearly went off too soon. Riding through the centre of London, Colthurst hit a pothole, sending the manuscript flying.
This manuscript started to spread across the road right outside the House of Commons. I rescued all the papers and shoved them quickly back into the box. I got away with it, so that really woke me up.
So as the publication date neared, suspense built to a frenzy. Sensational excerpts of the book would first be released in a national newspaper.
I can remember feeling extremely anxious about what was about to happen.
In a handwritten note to Colthurst, Diana declared the conspirators were preparing for the volcano to erupt.
I don't think any of the conspirators really fully understood how many megatons this explosion was going to be.
But there was no turning back. The presses started to roll, and Diana's story was about to rock the nation.
Coming up later, intimate and unguarded.
Linda, I'm just knackered, right?
Secret videotapes of the princess at the palace.
Princess Diana and her cohorts knew there was no turning back. A deal had been made with a prominent London newspaper, the Sunday Times, to serialize Morton's book. For months, they lived nervously with their secret, bracing for, well, they didn't know what to expect, but it was going to be big.
Sunday, June 7th, 1992. London awoke to a drab, overcast morning and explosive news. The inflammatory words so closely guarded for nearly a year were now headlines.
I got no support from Charles. The bulimia was appalling. I was trying to cut my wrist with razor blades.
People couldn't believe what they were seeing in print. The royal reporters were walking around in circles, not knowing what to do.
I thought that was the most monstrous headline and totally untrue.
Caught completely off guard, the palace was stunned.
I think the Queen was furious. There's not a family on earth, I think, that would want to see their marital troubles broadcast all over the world, let alone the royal family.
From day one, the four conspirators had vowed to hide that Diana was the source of the shocking material. Andrew Morton promised to take the secret to his grave. It looked as though they'd pulled it off. Even close friends of the princess, like Rosa Monckton, were in the dark.
Had she said anything to me, I'd have been absolutely livid with her. I considered it a complete betrayal, really, of her family and of her friends.
For the creators of the controversy, the response was beyond anything they could have imagined.
We were thinking atom bomb, and it was actually like several hydrogen bombs.
They were all desperately unhappy that somebody's come along and destroyed the fairy tale.
A journalist, Morton now found himself on the other side of a media frenzy. He had to weather criticism of his book while denying the one thing that would have made him credible, Diana's involvement.
I didn't interview the Princess of Wales for this book.
Have you ever spoken to the Princess of Wales at all?
I've spoken to her at the usual press receptions, but not in connection with this book. She hasn't read the manuscript.
Which, of course, was not true.
I would have loved, from day one, to have said, look, folks, Diana's wanted this book out, Diana wanted this book published. No, I couldn't say that.
Still, Diana was suspect from the start. Former palace spokesman Dickie Arbiter.
And I asked her, had she helped him? And hand on heart, she said, no, I don't know anything about it. And I knew she had, but you can hardly turn around to a member of the royal family and say that you're lying.
Diana stuck to her story. Pressure was also mounting for the friends of Diana who had openly contributed to the Morton book. Many, like former flatmate Carolyn Bartholomew, were being criticized for betraying Diana. But 4 days after the book was serialized, Diana sent out a meaningful signal to show that Carolyn had her blessing. It started with an anonymous phone call tipping off photographer Ken Lennox that the princess would be leaving her friend's house that morning.
Diana came out of Caroline's house, looked to see where I was, spoke to him for a few minutes, walked down the path, got into the car, and drove past me, looking at me all the way.
And it was a clear signal that I've got a story to tell, and I'm telling it, and a number of people have cooperated.
For some who had observed Diana through the years, her revelations triggered a brutally honest reappraisal of the royal marriage.
We all thought back, my God, so that's what was happening at such and such. And we were witnessing it, but we didn't want to add 1 and 1 and get 2. It seemed too ridiculous that they were totally unhappy.
For others, the book would confirm suspicions that the Princess of Wales was a troubled young woman. Author Penny Junor, known as a supporter of Prince Charles, would later write a book suggesting that Diana was mentally unstable.
I don't think he drove her to it. I think she came to that marriage as a very damaged individual. I don't know that anybody actually could have coped with her.
Junor maintains that Diana's story was full of exaggerations. She doesn't believe the suicide attempts were genuine, or that Camilla and Charles were romantically involved in the early years of their marriage, as Diana claimed.
This was Diana actually rewriting history. Morton had simply taken hook, line and sinker everything that Diana said.
I never said it was a balanced story. It's called Diana, Her True Story. It's from her perspective, it's about her life and her perception of that life.
For Diana, the days following the serialization of the book were fraught with uncertainty.
She was very nervous and, she had severe second thoughts.
But soon it was clear she'd won the support of the press and the people.
The letters started to arrive from the public, and she suddenly realized that maybe she hadn't committed a huge sin.
Diana was also encouraged because she and Prince Charles met the day after the book was serialized and privately agreed to go their separate ways. Finally, Diana felt she was being heard.
And she said, for the first time in years, I slept properly that night.
But the Queen rejected the idea of a formal separation, insisting instead on a 6-month cooling-off period. Diana would be expected to stay with Charles and present a unified front. But when the couple traveled to South Korea that fall, their estrangement was painfully obvious.
And I remember standing at the airport and the two of them appeared. I thought, oh God, we've lost it. Because you could see it written over their faces. And it was awful, because the media saw it. and the media knew exactly what they were going to do.
But the book had changed the rules. After Diana let her secrets get out, anything was fair game, including lurid material more befitting a pulp novel. An intercepted phone conversation between Diana and a man named James Gilby was made public. Diana was heard maligning her husband.
It's so difficult, so complicated. He makes my life real torture, I've decided.
A few months later, it was Prince Charles' turn to be humiliated when an intimate conversation with Camilla was released.
I can't bear a Sunday night without you. It's like that program Stop a Week. I can't stop a week without you.
By mid-December, 6 months after the Morton book rocked the House of Windsor, Prime Minister John Major made an announcement.
With regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate.
Diana had broken free. The plot that began when she recorded the details of her troubled life had worked.
She saw the book as her lifeboat, as her passport to a new world.
But how would Diana navigate that new world?
Up next, they've never been seen by the public. Private videotapes of Diana inside her palace home.
If I was able to write my own script, I would say that I would hope that my husband would go away with his lady and sort that out and leave me and the children to carry the Wales name.
She didn't need a partner anymore.
I can do this job so much better on my own.
Diana didn't intend to fade into the background. She had ambitions to step into a new public role. As a newly separated princess, she'd have to invent it.
Is that thing on?
Right. Go back to the top now.
Diana sought the expertise of speech coach and actor Peter Settlein.
By the time I came to work with Diana, I was very aware that this woman needed to have her real voice come out.
A key question.
What? Come on, get angry with me, yeah?
Is why do some people become addicted to all...
Settlein shot this videotape during coaching sessions with Diana to make her a more effective speaker.
Go on.
How do we stop people taking to addiction?
Really talk to me.
Taking to addiction or dependence.
It's never before been broadcast.
Slightly faster now. Let's move on, yes.
A rare glimpse of the princess in her own apartment, relaxed,
Sorry, which do you want?
Okay.
playful,
Hello,
Because suddenly...
when her guard is down. Settlein encouraged Diana to connect with her audience.
Thank you all.
Start it again, take your time, look at me first. And you're the star. Okay, stop it. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Very much.
Sometimes mistakes got the best of her.
Yeah.
Before we recognise alcoholism as a disease in the forms of incapacity for the almost incomprehensible.
Incomprehensible. If in doubt, hit it harder.
An insidious fear.
Insidious fear, yes.
Insidious fear.
Insidious.
Insidious fear. An extreme evil.
That's it.
Surfaces in people who may previously have seemed unpleasant.
Yeah.
Oh, pleasant. Sorry.
But she kept at it.
The more changes there are, the more threatened we feel.
Right, now carry on like that, yes.
Those who become ensnared in addiction are often highly sensitive and creative people.
After a while, she was just too tired to focus.
Close your eyes before you start the next page. Close your eyes.
I can't do many more of this page now. It's the cross-eyed.
Well, you can't see it. All right, go back to the... You can go back on... We can do
No,
this.
no, no.
Don't have to do a new one.
No, I'm just knackered, all right?
Settlein reminded Diana that their work had a purpose.
I'm not manufacturing you. I'm just bringing out that bit of you that wants a voice, which is the 30-year-old woman, 31-year-old woman, who has something important to say.
Given her break from the royal family, Sutherland foresaw a time when Diana might also break from royal tradition and do something unprecedented, a televised interview. So he prepared her with mock sessions.
You don't look at the camera. You wander your eyes around a little bit, but you don't go all over the place because we wonder where you're looking.
Diana found it hard to concentrate in front of an uninvited audience.
Can I watch this? Oh. If you come in here, you sit down and be quiet.
You've got to be very quiet.
Very quiet.
William and Harry were then 11 and 9.
Don't touch it, William, because it's all focused on me.
Okay, let's do it. Let's pretend, right? Okay, so Your Royal Highness, you're currently concentrating very much on your charity work. Would you like to tell us why you feel it's so important to you?
I got nothing else to do.
She's awful. I was recording.
Sorry.
Take 2.
Yesterday I come across Harry, shush. I come across a great deal of people who, it's awfully difficult. I can't even string my words together.
Well, it's really hard. You've got two of the most impossible people sitting here with us.
Harry, shush.
Shush, Harry, sit
all right.
down.
It's good practice to cope
Just sit. Just sit.
Sutherland urged Diana to articulate her goals.
What would you want to be if you weren't who you are? If you weren't the Princess of Wales?
I'd like to have a role which brought me into contact with everyday life and the man on the street. Does that sound condescending?
You can elaborate that a bit more. So let's, okay, so picture it a bit more as a role. Yes, if you weren't the Princess of Wales, what kind of job would you like to be doing?
Well, I'd like to be in a position where I could listen to people and maybe share knowledge on some sort, like counselling or something.
So counselling you found interesting. I mean,
yes.
You talk to a lot of people.
I enjoy enormously talking one-to-one to people. Yes.
Right. And I mean, you're doing this frequently. What particular aspect of that do you like the most?
I like to draw out the darker parts of people's way of thinking.
Why the darker parts?
Because normally the people I've met, they're afraid to share it with me or with anyone, and I think it helps by tapping onto it.
Princess Diana was changing, and so were the causes she chose to support.
I chose these particular areas because they were all areas where the individuals have been rejected for some reason or another, and I'm able to relate to that particular department because my role and my duties have taken me into have drawn me into these areas.
Diana's answers reveal how deeply she longed for the affirmation she felt she never got from the royal family.
And do you feel that what you do has a positive influence?
Well, I hope it does, because I think whoever we are, we all like to be thanked for what we're doing.
Diana understood that her position gave her the power to address issues others couldn't or wouldn't, such as AIDS.
Because I don't think it's a particularly glamorous area, because it's dealing with all sorts of issues. And the last issue is death, which people do not discuss freely.
There was one question, a fundamental question, that she could not answer.
Your Royal Highness, you're concentrating very much on your... Stop laughing at me. on your charity work. Why is this work so important to you?
Because it highlights the plight. It highlights the plight of others. And if I'm able to go into a situation which makes others more aware of their desperation and... I can't do this. It's ghastly.
What's ghastly?
Because I've got no adrenaline. I'm dead. I can't get anything out. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
There was a particularly poignant moment when Sutherland asked a straightforward question.
How do you see your role in, let's say, 5 years' time?
I have no clue to that question.
Nobody dreamed she wouldn't have 5 years. The year after Diana's coaching sessions with Sutherland, it was her husband who gave the first one-on-one royal television interview.
This is the story of the Prince of Wales today.
For a documentary called Charles, the Private Man, the Public Role. a 2.5-hour program, it was this 22-second exchange that viewers remember.
Did you try to be faithful and honourable to your wife when you took on the vow of marriage?
Yes, absolutely.
And you were?
Yes. Until it became irretrievably broken down. Us both having tried.
When they heard from the Prince of Wales's own mouth that he had committed adultery, that shattered a lot of illusions. I think Charles's confession of adultery was about the single biggest mistake he's ever made.
Diana made a statement of her own that night. She deliberately selected an outfit that would make heads turn when she attended a gallery opening.
She wore her up-you frock. It was a really lovely black number.
Great legs. I mean, she was out to kill Charles that night, kill him public-wise, and make everyone wonder whether Charles was just totally mad or not.
The following year, Diana gave her own interview to the BBC's Panorama. She even admitted having an affair with her writing instructor, James Hewitt, going further than she had on the audio tapes.
Were you unfaithful?
Yes, I adored him. Yes, I was in love with him.
And she publicly confirmed much of what she'd said in the secret tapes made 5 years earlier for Andrew Morton's book.
Do you think Mrs. Parker Bowles was a factor in the breakdown of your marriage?
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
Most controversial of all, she questioned Prince Charles' ability to be king.
I would think that the top job, as I call it, would bring enormous limitations to him. And I don't know whether he could adapt to that.
If ever a woman put the boot into somebody, it was suggesting that Charles could never take the #1 job, meaning he was not fit for it.
Diana's televised gamble paid off. As it did when the Morton book hit the stores, the public response was overwhelmingly sympathetic, though she was skewered by Charles' allies, including then Defense Minister Nicholas Soames.
It really is the sort of advanced stages of paranoia.
Given the fact that everything she suspected turned out to be true, how can you say that was paranoia?
The Queen had had enough. A month after the broadcast, she urged Charles and Diana to divorce. In August of 1996, the marriage between the Prince and the Princess of Wales was officially dissolved. A chapter in her life had closed. As Diana told James Colthurst 5 years earlier, she had expected it.
I think from day one, I always knew I'd never be the next Queen. Put it that way. No one said that to me. I just knew it.
When we return, the deadly crash beneath the streets of Paris.
The media were not responsible for Diana's death.
Did Diana predict her own tragic end? Diana talks about her destiny.
Battle-scarred but hopeful, Diana was finally free to pursue the life she wanted. And it would include the romance and affection she craved.
I had so many dreams as a young girl, hopes that my husband would look after me, he'd be like a father figure, he'd support me, encourage me, say well done, but I didn't get any of that.
So when 1 year after her divorce, a handsome millionaire named Dodi Fayed began to shower her with charm, gifts, and attention, the princess was receptive. Diana had spent most of her life trying to dodge the press. But now she made a point of showing how happy she finally was by orchestrating a photo op on the deck of Dodi's yacht.
The Dodi picture on the boat with the case and so on, I mean, that was a telephone call between the photographer and Dodi. And Diana. It was all being managed.
But Diana's relationship with the press had always been complicated. She used them, they used her, and it was a dangerous game.
Could I ask you to respect my children's space?
Out. Out. O-U-T, out. Have a nice trip, man.
The game ended in Paris. August 31st, 1997. Her driver was racing to escape the paparazzi when the car slammed into a pillar in the Alma Tunnel.
10 minutes after the car crash, I got a phone call from a French photographer.
In an instant, Ken Lennox, then photo editor at the Sun newspaper in London, received explicit pictures of Diana in the car. The photographer told him she was fine. Lennox bought the shots for nearly $500,000.
I knew how important the photographs would be. Diana looked dazed, and she had a little trickle of blood coming from her ear and a little from her nose, and didn't look badly injured.
In fact, Diana's condition was grave. At the hospital, doctors tried for 2 hours to save her, but the internal injuries were overwhelming.
I heard that there had been a car crash in Paris and that Dodi had died. And there was a bit of me that half expected the phone to ring and for her to ring up and say, life's rough, you know, and what do I do now?
And the first thing that we heard was that that Dodi was killed, but that she had just broken her leg. So I immediately rang her on her mobile and left a message saying, you know, I'm coming out, you know, don't worry, it'll all be fine. You know. And then, of course, the night went on, you know, and we heard the news.
At the age of 36, Diana, Princess of Wales, the people's princess, was dead.
She was almost like a sort of distant relative.
Ken Lennox had taken some of the very first photos of Diana. In his hands, he now had the last. But valuable as those pictures were, Lennox had finally reached a line he couldn't cross. He never published them.
I felt miserable. I felt like I had lost somebody that I cared for. Here was a girl who had been a big part of my life. I'd spent months with her at a time. I'd traveled the world following her. And it wasn't until the picture of the coffin, draped with Prince Charles's standard coming out, that I just looked at that picture, my God, she is dead.
More than 700 million people had watched Diana's wedding. 2.5 billion people watched her funeral. The world was in mourning.
For me, the abiding memory of the funeral is of the soldiers' feet shuffling along the floor of the abbey. It was the most, it was just hearing her coming.
Goodbye, England's rose, may you ever grow in our hearts. You are
a memorial service after Elton John brought tears to the eyes of a nation.
torn apart.
Diana's brother Charles looked for someone to blame.
Of all the ironies about Diana, perhaps the greatest was this. A girl given the name of the ancient goddess of hunting was, in the end, the most hunted person of the modern age.
Diana's brother makes a speech where he's saying she was pursued mercilessly by photographers who have finally caused her death. Oh, I mean, I could feel my own flesh creep.
In fact, the paparazzi who chased her that night were initially charged with involuntary homicide. They have since been cleared, and tests revealed her driver was legally drunk.
The media were not responsible for Diana's death. Diana invited the media. She was the one who actually let them in.
There are unsupported but persistent rumors that Diana was pregnant when she died. And many have a hard time believing Princess Diana would die such an ordinary death. Polls in Europe show that many believe she was assassinated. By one theory, because the royal family wouldn't tolerate a marriage between a Muslim and the mother of England's future king. And just recently, Diana's former butler, Paul Burrell, released an unsettling letter she wrote, predicting someone would try to have her killed in a car crash made to look like an accident. While there's no evidence to support that charge, a royal inquest into Diana's death is underway in Britain. A worldwide fascination with Diana endures to this day, and that in part is why those responsible for the secret tapes of her voice agreed to make them available now. The princess, they say, ought to be remembered as the woman she was.
I think we're beginning now to see her as a human being at last. And a human being is certainly what you hear on those tapes.
Not some mad woman, as they're trying to characterise her at the moment, but a woman with a sense of self. And despite the trauma of her life, she was able to look on it with a certain wry sense of humour, which characterised the Diana that many people came to know and love.
What was your feeling now of your destiny?
Now, as I speak today, I think I'm going to cut a very different path for everyone else, I'm going to break away from this setup and go and help the man on the street.
I think that she made an emotionally constipated nation look at itself in a different way.
It'll be fascinating to see how deep I can get. I'm so looking forward to it. And I'll be able to prove to the world, if prove is the right word, that I can jolly well fulfill this position.
It's only probably after her death that the royal family have come to realise what it was that she got so right. And what she got right was her hands-on approach. She touched people. She showed that she cared.
I know one day, if I play the rules of life, game of life, I will be able to have those things which I've always pined for, and they'll be that much more special because I'll be that much more older and be able to appreciate them that much more.
Princess Diana recorded her story when her life was in crisis. Her common touch would endear her to the public. Now, when it seemed no one in her life would listen or care, she reached out to the public for help, hoping that their understanding would bring her private torment to an end. It was risky. It was revealing. But she put her faith in the people who seemed to care for her the most. Tonight, you've had a chance to listen, to hear the humanity in her voice, her sorrow, her turmoil, and even her laughter. She wanted her story told. In the end, she told it best herself.